Hello, everyone. Hello, please come on in and have a seat. You know, it's hard to believe that this day has actually arrived in some ways. We're extremely excited. Our faculty and our students are really so excited about what we're here to celebrate today. So my name is Grant Miller. I'm the director of Stanford's new Center on Global Poverty and Development. And on behalf of John Levin, Jesper Sorensen, Mark Duggan, as well as our deputy director, Jessica Lino, and so many others that have worked tremendously hard to make this new center possible. It's such a great pleasure to welcome you here today to celebrate the center's launch. So a story that I like to tell, and I guess it makes me sound like I'm old, and you can decide whether or not I'm actually old. When I was a graduate student, I once went to an event with a bunch of prominent academics talking about the challenges of global poverty. And at the end of the event, someone in the audience stood up and said, you know, I'm the CEO of this big company and I'm so motivated to work on these challenges that you're talking about on global poverty. What can I do to help? And the first person on this panel to spring up and answer was Jeffrey Sachs. So if you know Jeff Sachs, there are chuckles in the room already. He's the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia, a tremendous figure and leader. And in his usual impassioned way, he said, contribute more resources. We desperately need more resources devoted to the challenges of global poverty. And then the next person on the panel sort of took the microphone from him. This is Bob Barrow, who is a prominent macroeconomist at Harvard, and looked the person in the audience straight in the eye and said, it's very simple, maximize profits. And so I don't think this is exactly what the person asking the question was expecting to hear. But you know, if you think about it, there's a little truth in both of those answers, but as you all know, the truth is also a bit more complicated as well. And that's exactly why we need this center. If you fast forward to today, the body of evidence has really been growing, but the answer to that CEO's question is still not exactly clear. There's enormous scope, and there's a real need for the creation of new insights and new ideas in collaboration with partners around the world that translate into real-world results in promoting global development. There's also a secret, I guess I wanted to let you in on very quickly, which is, in case you didn't know, we're not the first center at a university to work on global poverty and development. I don't know if you knew that. And we're actually not even the second. But I think it goes without saying that Stanford is truly a world-leading university, and I think all of you here in this room know that there's some things that Stanford is just truly awesome at. And the purpose of this center, its goal, is to more purposefully focus those things squarely on the challenges of global development than has occurred yet, through our faculty and through our students in collaboration with leaders from the public and the private sectors. Organizationally, it's a little confusing. This center is the union of what used to be the Center for International Development here at SIEPR, the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, on the one hand, and the research arm of SEED, the Stanford Institute for Innovation and Developing Economies, on the other hand. But what it's really doing is creating a community that is truly interdisciplinary and campus-wide. We're so grateful for the generosity of our supporters, some of whom are here with us tonight, without whom none of this would be possible, really and truly. Today is in some sense like a birthday, and they say that you don't often remember your first birthday, but I think tonight will be very memorable. I'd really like to tell you quite a lot in some detail about this new center, the Center on Global Poverty and Development, and we're going to be growing and developing very rapidly over the coming year. But we have other things to turn to tonight. I'd really encourage you to keep a close eye on our website to see what we're up to and to learn more about how you can get involved with us. So now I'm going to turn to introducing a few very important guests that we have here with us tonight. The first is Marc Tessier-Lavigne, our president here at Stanford, whom we're really absolutely delighted to have join us this evening. President Tessier-Lavigne is a pioneering neuroscientist and leader in biotechnology and higher education. He returned to Stanford after serving for 5 years as president of the Rockefeller University, a leading graduate biomedical research university. Prior to his time in New York, he spent more than 2 decades here in the Bay Area. From 2001 to 2005, he served on the Stanford faculty as a professor of biological sciences and held the Susan B. Ford Professorship in the School of Humanities and Sciences. While at Stanford, he was then recruited to Genentech, where he served as executive vice president for research and chief scientific officer, directing more than 1,400, mind-boggling, 1,400 scientists in disease research and drug discovery for cancer and other illnesses. Prior to his time at Stanford, he served on the faculty at the University of California, San Francisco, where he was recognized for distinguished teaching and groundbreaking discoveries on brain development. He's the recipient of numerous awards, including being elected a member of the National Academy of Sciences and its Institute of Medicine, a fellow at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He earned his undergraduate degrees from McGill University and from Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar, and a PhD from University College London. He conducted postdoctoral work both there and at Columbia University. President Tessier-Lavigne, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Grant. Well, thank you so much, Grant, for that warm introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight with all of you. And I'm honored to celebrate this important launch. This evening, I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude for all your efforts, and then briefly talk about why I think the Center's work is so important. So first and foremost, there's so many people who made this day possible. From all the early supporters of the new center, as well as Stanford Seed, the Stanford Center on International Development, and CEPR, to our more than 100 affiliated faculty across all 7 schools, to our students who are so passionate about changing the world, to our staff who so beautifully executed all of the many details, and to our generous circle of friends who are dedicated to helping Stanford take on global poverty and development challenges. To all of you, thank you so much. And let's please give all of the members of the Center on Global Poverty and Development a big round of applause for this landmark event. The Center's mission is so important to address these challenges, the challenges of global poverty and development, by turning research into real-world results. The Center will have the capability to provide breakthrough insights on a variety of multifaceted problems, including job creation, education, access to finance, infrastructure and governance, medical care, and sustainability. Great examples are the new programs you've already developed, which are being led by interdisciplinary teams of faculty, including the Data for Development initiative, which will leverage new data and tools for addressing a broad range of challenges related to infrastructure, agriculture, and migration. And the Firms and Global Productivity initiative, which will fill the void of information that firms need to drive economic growth in developing countries. As well, I appreciate the Center's focus on students, which aims to inspire students and encourage them to focus on lessening global poverty. These efforts broadly translate into the development of partnerships, better focused research for the key challenges on the ground, and collaboration with communities that drives innovation and empowers local leadership. The Center also builds on Stanford's strong foundation of existing and varied global initiatives, including the SEED transformation program, already active on the African continent and in India, and the Center for International Development with its historic focus on supporting research and engaging policymakers. By coordinating our multidisciplinary global research and policy initiative, this center will allow us to focus our knowledge and improve Stanford's capacity to make a difference in lives and communities around the world. And if we can make a difference, we must. And because of all of you, we will. So in closing, I want to thank all of you once more for the commitment and the collaboration that has made tonight possible and that will make the Center's success possible. I'm honored to congratulate you on such an important milestone. Congratulations. And now I'd like to welcome back Grant, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Tessier-Lavigne, both for your inspiring words and for your strong support of our center. So now I'm really thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is currently chair of the board of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. Since its creation in 2000, Gavi has immunized 580 million children globally and is credited with saving 8 million lives. She's also chair of the board of the Africa Union's Africa Risk Capacity, an innovative weather-based insurance mechanism for African countries. Previously, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala served twice as Nigeria's finance minister, as well as foreign minister in 2006. She was the first woman to hold both of these positions. She also had a 25-year career as a development economist at the World Bank, rising to the position of managing director, responsible for an $81 billion operations portfolio that included Europe and Central Asia, South Asia, and Africa. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is a highly decorated and inspiring leader who's been recognized widely by Fortune, Forbes, Foreign Policy, Newsweek, Time. I'll have to end the list there. Others. She graduated magna cum laude with an undergraduate degree in economics from Harvard and then earned a PhD in regional economics and development from MIT. On the side, she is the author of numerous articles and several books. After Dr. Okonjo-Iweala's remarks, Professor Pascaline Dupas will be moderating a short discussion with our speaker this evening and then leading an opportunity for questions from you all. Professor Dupas, well known to many of you here at Stanford, is an associate professor of economics, as well as a senior fellow here at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, or SEPR. She's also a member of our new center's faculty steering committee, I might add. Through extensive fieldwork and experiments, her research aims to understand the barriers that households and governments face in fostering health and education, and how those barriers can be overcome. Professor Dupas has received many prestigious awards. She didn't want me to embarrass myself by pronouncing too many things in French, but I will point out one in particular, notable in my mind anyway. She was named Best Young French Economist in 2015 by Le Monde and Cercle des Economistes. How did I do? As you can tell, I should stop talking and let others take the mic. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, we're really looking forward to your talk tonight entitled Enabling Development, When Can Technology Be Effective? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Okonjo-Iweala.
Well, thank you very much, Grant. I try to school myself to listen to descriptions of myself, and I always end up being surprised and wondering, when did I do all of those things? But it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I think I'm more used to speaking at universities on the East Coast. So somehow when I speak at MIT or Harvard, I feel very relaxed. But for Stanford, I've been feeling very tense. So there's a lot of expectation. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I'm having an exam. So let's see how I do. I'm already grading myself a C. But let me say that it's very nice to be here because I actually do recognize some faces in the audience, and it's good to see them. I'm very grateful to Grant. Grant was amazing. He was persistent. He was insistent about this talk. I'm also grateful to the President for being here today. I know you're very busy, President Tessier-Lavigne, so it's good to have you. I want to recognize John Taylor. John, you will not know this, but John was totally instrumental when he was Under Secretary of the Treasury to helping Nigeria obtain debt relief, where we had $30 billion of our debt written off, by pushing his colleagues to support us in that endeavor. And Ambassador Ethran Cousins, who is here, many of you may not know her. She's a former US representative, head of the World Food Program in Rome, and she's spending a year. It's wonderful to see you, Ethran. I also want to say one final shout out, as my children would say, to Fred Swanica. Where are you? One of the brightest young Africans on the planet. And Bob and Dottie King, whom I really do not know, but have heard so much about. And I'm not recognizing you for all the endowments you've made. I'm recognizing you for having kept African students in your house year after year for 50 years. Please give them a round of applause. So now, let me say what an absolute pleasure it is to be here. The launch of this extraordinary new center on global poverty and development. And I, for one, am excited by the possibilities that it brings. Building on Stanford's academic excellence and expertise, this center represents precisely the kind of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach that we need to tackle the growing challenges in the fight against poverty, bringing together researchers, policymakers, and business leaders in an innovative model for real-world impact. In fact, in coming here tonight, it occurred to me that having spent most of my life between Africa and Washington, D.C., as a former managing director for the World Bank and as finance minister for Nigeria twice, you could even argue that I myself am the product of this kind of multi-windowed, multidisciplinary, across-continent approach. So I approve of it very much. This kind of collaborative, joined-up thinking will become increasingly important in the coming years as we attempt to achieve the ambitious targets laid out by the Sustainable Development Goals, partly because of the sheer scale of ambition of these 17 global goals, which set out the challenges of the 21st century and beyond, with equally ambitious targets for all nations to meet to address these challenges. But also, this kind of thinking is important because the fight against poverty is likely to become more difficult with each passing year. We've made all the gains, and I will not go into them, but you all know what we've gained in maternal mortality that has decreased, infant mortality, and so on, and the decrease in poverty, largely contributed to by China. But the easy gains have been made, and I think that what remains will be a hard-fought fight. And we're already living in a time of global uncertainty, with the largest number of displaced people since World War II, driven by a period of increased conflict and growing pressure from climate change. Rising inequality within and between nations is a strong concern. We are witnessing an unprecedented turn against multilateralism and all the cooperation the whole community has built up all these past 70 years. A fortress mentality is emerging in some countries. And now, these global trends, together with population growth, urbanization, and human migration, are changing the global landscape in ways that will conspire to make our work increasingly difficult. That is why we need to work together and be smarter about how we do things. Finding solutions is not enough. They have to be the right solutions for the right settings. Because in development, so often, it is the context that determines the difference between success and failure. Or as Albert Einstein once put it, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. To explain this further, I'd like to talk about it in the context of technology. And I thought long and hard about it. How can you come to a place that is all about technology? To come and talk about technology, you should talk about something else. But I thought I'd talk about this technology, because some of you, there may be, I think it's good to share how just some very little things, some very small innovations can solve some of the biggest problems that we're facing in the developing world. And I can only talk from my experience. So I want to share some of that experience and other examples. You know, it's not going to be about these big technological breakthroughs. So if you're sitting here waiting to hear about that, you can leave now. That's not what I'm going to talk about. You're going to hear a lot about mobile phones. Please don't get sick of it. But I've seen how a lot of the applications can solve a lot of real-world problems. So I'm going to talk about the context of technology and how it can be, small things can be enablers. As I've said elsewhere, sometimes despite the potential benefits technology can offer, in the past it has also often had negative impacts on the lives of poor people. Since the Industrial Revolution, if it wasn't putting people out of work, technology was endangering them through hazardous working environments or long-term exposure to pollutants. Today, in many ways, it seems no different, with many of the biggest problems in development either triggered by technology or exacerbated by it. Climate change brought about through industrialization is driving people from their homes, while mobile phones and the internet have delivered pictures of a better lifestyle to the poorest corners of the globe. That doesn't make mobile phones a bad technology. I've already told you I'm going to talk a lot about them. On the contrary, they've had very positive impact on the lives of poor people. Nevertheless, they've also helped make the world smaller, enough for millions of people to risk death in the hope of improving their lives. And who can blame them? Even in remote rural villages, the 24-hour news cycle is feeding an endless stream of hope. People young and old see a different lifestyle to their own. They see what others have, stability, safety, and economic opportunity. And they see what they do not have. They see the inequality and the harsh reality of their own lives. Nobody wants to live in poverty. And so with nothing left to lose except what little remains of their dreams, in their millions they live, by whatever means possible, often putting their fate in the hands of unscrupulous human traffickers. They risk their lives in hope of a better life, climbing aboard airless trucks to be smuggled like livestock across borders into America and Europe, or in overcrowded death boats across the Mediterranean. It's utterly tragic. The solution has to be to remove the forces that are driving people from their homes and to find ways to make their lives better where they live. This is not just true for migration, but for development in general. And just as technology has played a role in creating these issues, it needs to be part of the solution, helping to mitigate hunger, improve access to education and health, and ultimately lift people, communities, and countries out of poverty. Some of this will come through big breakthrough moonshot ideas, but in most cases, solutions will be found in existing technologies, either being applied in novel ways or finding a perhaps small but impactful niche. Either way, the common denominator will be technologies that are able to solve real-world problems in low-resource settings, rather than those that are just successful in wealthy countries. For example, at the turn of the century, the whole of Africa had fewer fixed-line telephones than your average large American city. Yet within just a few years, mobile phone technology came in and quickly overtook fixed-line telephones. Today, there are now around 750 million unique mobile subscribers within Africa's population of 1.2 billion. In Nigeria, we have gone from 450,000 landlines in 2000 to 139 million active mobile users today in a population of 190 million people. A pretty remarkable increase, wouldn't you say? And why is that? Because the simple fact is that it's a more suitable technology, requiring infrastructure that was far easier and cheaper to build, so coverage rapidly increased. In development, this kind of leapfrogging can have a dramatic impact on the lives of millions. We've also seen this in agriculture. 50 years ago, the crossbreeding of a high-yield strain of rice from Indonesia with a short and sturdier variety from China resulted in IR8, a new breed that helped trigger the Green Revolution in India. a period of increased agricultural productivity that ended decades of famine in the region. This new breed could produce almost 10 times the yield of traditional breeds, but was shorter and less prone to tipping than other high-yield crops. An elegant solution tailored to a real-world development problem. But while this kind of moonshot projects can have an extraordinary impact, simple but effective uses of existing technologies also enable incredible progress. Let me give you a few examples. The first one is from my experience in Nigeria. In Nigeria and all over Africa, for instance, much has been made of the new rice for Africa. How many of you have heard of it? It's called Nerica, another high-yield hybrid strain, engineered to be pest-resistant, more tolerant of drought and infertile soils compared to most traditional Asian varieties, making it more suitable to conditions in Africa. But the cultivation and success of Nerica and other headline-grabbing high-yield crop varieties can often be dependent on other factors. First, farmers have to have access to the new high-yielding varieties, along with the fertilizers, pesticides, and other inputs necessary to support the higher yields. In my home country, Nigeria, for years, farmers could not get the fertilizer they needed because government-subsidized fertilizer was often diverted through corrupt middlemen and women. It is estimated that over the 30-year period that we had this program in the government, over 776 billion naira, the equivalent of $4.8 billion, was lost to corruption. But then, in 2011, the availability and ownership of mobile phones by farmers allowed my cabinet colleague, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, the Minister of Agriculture at the time, in the second cabinet I served, and now President of the African Development Bank, to introduce an innovative system for access to inputs that cut out the middleman and middlewoman. The e-wallet system he developed sent electronic vouchers directly to the mobile phones of farmers, who could then use them to purchase fertilizer and other inputs directly from dealers in the village, who in turn could then cash in the vouchers at the bank. The impact was dramatic. The percentage of farmers getting subsidized fertilizer went from 11% to 71%. Productivity went up. For example, rice yields doubled from 2 to 4 metric tons per hectare. Overall output increased, and we made an annual savings of 26 billion naira of about $162 million yearly through this system by cutting out the corrupt middleman. The program was already targeting women farmers, but in 2013, to support this success and further empower women farmers, in my role as finance minister, I also created additional incentives in the budget through a gender-based budgeting pilot that encouraged the Minister of Agriculture to include more women in the scheme. Until this point, 263,000 women farmers were receiving the seed and fertilizer subsidies through the electronic voucher. With the additional budget incentives, that rose to 1.4 million by 2014, a 536% increase. All this through the enabling technology of mobile phones and a payment application adapted to local conditions. Let me now turn to education. Like in agriculture, there have been major advances in education technology, popularly known as EdTech. The ubiquitousness of laptops, internet-based learning, machine learning, and so on have created a mini revolution. You have your massive open online courses or MOOCs that have increased access to top quality education. I know that you're very active here in Stanford in all of this. But again, this is not really what I want to talk about. Instead, I want to talk about the low-key, relatively unsophisticated technology enabler that can make such a huge difference in solving some of our critical problems in education. Now, you know we have real problems in this sector. I'm part of the Global Education Commission chaired by former Prime Minister of the UK, Gordon Brown. Our work shows that 263 million children and young people are out of school globally. And of those in school, many are not actually learning. If present trends continue, by 2030, just 4 out of 10 children of school age in low and middle income countries will be on track to gain basic secondary level skills. Isn't that frightening? Out of school children and poor learning outcomes are due to many problems, not least conflict and poverty. The World Bank in its new 2017 World Development Report on Learning notes that, quote, teachers are the most important factor affecting learning in schools. They go on to say that in the United States, students with good teachers or great teachers advance 1.5 grade levels or more over a single school year, compared with just half a grade level for those with an ineffective teacher. Yet, in developing countries, teacher absenteeism is a huge problem, probably one of the biggest problems we have to solve. And there are a number of factors that can contribute to this, but a key factor is incentives. How teachers are rewarded, including, importantly, how they even receive their paychecks, is a factor. In Liberia, teachers in rural areas have to physically travel to a bank to collect their salary. This can, in some cases, involve a 10-hour bus ride and cost an average of 15% of their total salary. It also means what? Days lost from the classroom. Absenteeism, on the order of 2 days a week in some cases, was found among 75% of these teachers, was found to be tied to the collection of salary. So 75% of the absent teachers were busy absent from class because they were trying to collect their paychecks at one time or the other. A joint project by USAID and the government of Liberia brought in a simple enabling technology to solve the problem. Guess what again? Mobile phones. Like the agriculture example, salaries were paid via these phones and could be cashed in immediately with local agents, eliminating the need to travel. The innovation eliminated absenteeism from the classrooms and reduced the cost of receiving paychecks by 84%. Similarly, where other factors are the cause of teacher absenteeism, phones and cameras have been found to be effective ways to encourage teachers' attendance. And I know that Grant and I spoke earlier in the day about the Esther Duflo experiment, the work she did in India with some others, using getting pupils to take time-stamped photos of teachers in classrooms in order to monitor and track the teacher attendance. And this, combined with some incentives, again, halved absenteeism in those districts in which this experiment was performed. In both cases, these are not high-tech solutions. They are not major breakthroughs. They are simple examples of existing technology becoming an enabler. Applied in novel ways, mobile phones and cameras had a big impact to the great benefit of learning experiences of the children affected. Now, let me take an example in health, again involving phones. Just taking advantage of how pervasive the technology has become to help solve a major development issue. In global health, an ongoing challenge is to find ways to keep vaccines cold. Most vaccines need to be refrigerated to remain safe and effective. In the poorest parts of the world, the electricity required to power refrigerators is often either unavailable or unreliable. In my country, Nigeria, we struggle with power. In 2014, Nigeria's per capita electricity consumption was about 144 kilowatt hours per capita, compared to South Africa, the next largest economy, at 4,228 kilowatt hours per capita, and guess what, in the US, 12,986 kilowatt hours per capita. In these circumstances, vaccine storage is a daily challenge. One approach that had been explored in the past tried to take inspiration from the private sector. The logic being that if you can get an ice-cold Coca-Cola or Pepsi pretty much anywhere in the world, then shouldn't it be possible to piggyback off that same logistical infrastructure to keep vaccines cold? As it turns out, no, you can't. The flaw in this great plan was that with Coca-Cola, you only need a refrigerator or ice at the point of sale. But vaccines need a continuous cold chain. As soon as that chain is broken, then the clock starts ticking in terms of how long you have before the vaccine must be used. So now a more effective approach is being explored that takes advantage of the fact that mobile phones are ubiquitous. With nearly 7 billion being used globally, a vast network of cell towers now ensures it is possible to get a signal almost anywhere that people live. So given this, and the fact that mobile phone companies have every incentive to keep their towers powered, an organization called Energize the Chain had the great idea to co-locate cold chain refrigerators at those sites. Since 2013, they have installed around 350 remotely monitored vaccine refrigerators at cell tower sites across Zimbabwe and Ghana, focusing on regions with poor cold chain equipment performance. This not only provides a reliable source of power to the refrigerators, but it also draws on the fact that they are communication towers, using their connectivity to enable continuous monitoring of the internal temperature of the fridges. So it is possible to tell, for example, when a door has been left open. The potential impact of this kind of innovation on improving immunization is huge. This is one reason why Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, an organization originally co-founded by and whose board was chaired by Nelson Mandela, a position that I now humbly hold, is partnering with the private sector to invest millions into this kind of enabling technology. From new kinds of cooling systems to data analytics, the aim is to simultaneously encourage the scaling up of promising technology platforms while stimulating innovation within cold chain equipment markets. Doing so should help Gavi bridge the immunization gaps that exist, increasing coverage and equity, with the goal of helping Gavi achieve its target of vaccinating 300 million more children by 2020, thereby preventing 5 to 6 million more deaths. You should know that Gavi is a unique alliance that has delivered amazing results in the 16 years of its experience, having vaccinated 640 million children and saved 9 million lives, with an incredible rate of return. For each dollar invested in vaccines, you get $16 in avoided health costs. Besides improving vaccine delivery, cold chain innovation has a broader role to play in global health and the success of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. Because improving the infrastructure that enables better access to vaccines for hard-to-reach communities can also create better access to other vital health interventions, such as nutrition, maternal health, protection against malaria and deworming. In a very real sense, building strong immunization systems creates a platform which we can build on to help us work towards the Sustainable Development Goal target of universal health coverage, or UHC. Now let me talk about governance, because another way in which enabling technology can play an important role is in instituting transparency in government affairs and in fighting corruption. Currently, around $9.5 trillion is spent on government procurement globally each year, the equivalent of 15% of global GDP. 57% of cases investigated under the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention focus on this procurement. So given that a sizable chunk of government procurement is believed to be lost to corruption, preventing this illicit activity would not only leave more resources to finance health, education, women's empowerment, and other good investment for the SDGs, but it would also help restore trust in governments across the world. Through initiatives like the Open Government Partnership and the Development Gateway, there are now efforts to develop technology platforms capable of monitoring procurement processes and preventing corruption. Development Gateway in particular has developed an open contracting platform, a technology tool for tracking and monitoring corruption in procurement. So I've given all these examples of applications and of different types of technology, but mostly focused on mobile phones. And I've talked about technology enablers to development. And you notice that as human beings, we have a tendency to dwell on success and talk little about failures. But in life, failures can be very instructive. So I want to just say a few words, not quite about failures, but maybe about technologies that didn't work quite as well as they were supposed to. You know, the other day when I got into Washington, D.C., I got quite excited while driving because I heard on a program on NPR that was talking about technology failures. And like I said, you don't often hear about failures. They talked of a Project X team at Google, where the job is to do moonshot projects where people are paid to dare, to take risks, and to fail. I'm sure all of you know about it. Do you? Yeah, because I didn't know. And I thought, what a wonderful idea to be paid to fail. What a great way to learn. And I was kind of half wishing that I could join that team. But, you know, I wanted to mention a few examples where things may not have gone so well. And let me take one or two from my continent. The first example goes some way to explain why Amazon or any form of e-commerce requiring clear logistics has been slow to take off in parts of Africa. In my country, there are a couple of companies that started off, and they're doing okay, but they've struggled because this idea of this application working in our country in a context for which they were not developed is very interesting, and I think that's why they've struggled. What do I mean? In so many of our cities and rural areas, the streets have no names, and the houses have no numbers. So logistics becomes an absolutely incredible challenge in delivering when you're doing e-commerce because it makes addresses meaningless. So just try ordering something. Let me give you an example of an address. To be delivered to plot 155, formerly plot 20, Ajanaku, off Adelabu, behind Kingsway, opposite Shell petrol station. Do any of the Africans relate to this? Am I telling a lie? Is that not an address? That's not one that you can easily find by GPS, is it? First, you will wonder, why is plot 115? Why is it now plot 155? Why is it formerly plot 20? Then you don't know whether Ajanaku is a street or a boulevard or a highway, and it says off Adelabu. What is that? Is that another street? Are these localities? What are these? Certainly, it's not easy for GPS to pick up on such an address. So, small wonder that if you have a company that depends on delivery on this logistics, it can become a nightmare and it can slow things down. So, what does that mean? You really need to think about the context in which you're doing your e-commerce and how you're going to overcome some of these realities on the ground. The second one comes to underestimating human nature. I've already talked about the challenges of vaccine cold chains. One innovation aimed at solving the problem of keeping vaccines cold in places where there is limited or intermittent power. One innovation was the solar-powered fridge, which makes a lot of sense. The earliest of these devices were cleverly designed to contain a battery which would charge during the day, so that the fridge could be kept running through the night. Nothing wrong with that. That's very sensible. Except that they started to find that the batteries would go missing or get run down to power other devices. People will always be people. So you have to think. Fortunately, engineers figured out how to get around this, and the latest generation of solar direct drive refrigerators have no battery to steal or drain. Instead, the energy is stored thermally within the cooling system itself, a bit like a nice battery. Let's take another example, the one laptop per child project. I don't know how many of you remember that. This highly ambitious program aimed to transform education in poor countries by making laptops so accessible through the development of low-cost, low-power machines that every child could have. But despite the initial excitement the project generated, it ultimately foundered in several countries, and one no longer hears about it the way it should. It was a really exciting project. Technical issues were partly to blame. Both teachers and students had very little understanding, sometimes, of how to use the computers, which was particularly a problem when the machines malfunctioned, as laptops are inclined to do from time to time. Without technical support, too often, the computers were rendered useless. Because of this, and in some countries such as Uruguay, as many as 1 in 4 of these laptops were out of commission. And even when they did work, too often access to the internet was limited or non-existent. In addition to the technical problems, the economics didn't really work well either. The laptops were originally supposed to cost $100 a piece. Yet by the time they were released, the price tag had almost doubled. Meanwhile, once the laptops were launched, the program also took orders from countries that would order a minimum of 1 million laptops. And that put them out of the reach of many developing countries. But even though in the end the minimum order was reduced, by the time all these problems occurred, many investors had pulled out, and the goal of reaching so many millions of children was not reached because of the multiple issues that came up and the lack of fit to the many contexts in which the laptop was supposed to work. So it's worth remembering that for every technological success, there are multiple failures or ones that don't work quite so well. But should that scare us off in attempting to find solutions? The answer is no. Mandela once said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." Too often, it comes down to a question of perspective, of finding a suitable technological solution to real-world problems, rather than starting with a specific technology and trying to make it fit. So now, let me conclude with a few thoughts. With that in mind, let me just see if I can offer 1 or 2 thoughts for those starting out on their journeys on how best to approach the development problems you will inevitably face. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir and to the converted. You know, all of those who are working in this center who work in it already know all of this. But I have to end somehow, don't I? So first, let me encourage you to think big, but also to think small. To think breakthrough, but also to think enable, as far as technology is concerned. Second, the key to finding technology that works for development is people. Everything comes back to people and their problems, the incentives or disincentives that surround them in the environment. So it's critical that an innovator understands this. Thirdly, they must properly frame the problem, studying the context to understand the economic, financial, physical, environmental, as well as the social barriers and enhancers to technology. And most importantly, it's about getting out there. You cannot solve these problems by sitting behind a desk in Stanford. I know you know that, but I have to repeat it. And again, it comes back to people. To understand people, you have to spend time among them. And I don't mean your 3-week mission that we used to do in the World Bank and still do. I don't mean even your 6-week design mission grant that you talked about. I mean living with the people for some time to try and understand what motivates them. What is the nature of the problem? What's the sociological context within which, what is the political economy of what you're trying to do? And then trying to find a technology that answers that problem. And with that, it will not always be the big breakthroughs that will have the highest impact. It may be those little adaptations, those little innovations that may make the most sense in the situations in which we live. So, Jimmy Carter said, go out on a limb. Please go out on a limb, as he said, because that's where the fruit is. Thank you very much. I thought I was done.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring and insightful talk. We are so glad to hear you. I hope you can come back sometime. I'm teaching an undergrad class every Monday morning. I wish you had been here this morning. You would have really inspired my students. Some of them are here, fortunately. So I wanted to immediately start with a couple of questions that came to mind while hearing you speak. On the Amazon situation in Nigeria, I just got an idea. How about drones? Because you said everybody has a cell phone, there's a GPS on a cell phone, and so the GIS location can be easily communicated with the service, and then drones can just drop off the stuff. So is that do you think that's a good idea?
I like it. Why not? Let me tell you, in Gavi, we have partnered with a company, US company called Zipline. It's a small company, and then with UPS. What is this partnership? I have to give all credit to the government of Rwanda because they were the ones who came to us and said, can we try this? Now, Rwanda has a lot of hills and mountains. I don't know if there's any Rwandan here. But building infrastructure to all those places to reach people is very expensive. So they came up with the idea, can we use drones to deliver vaccines and blood? And that's what we're doing. So from a center in Kigali, drones take these things up, and we're able to save so many lives doing that. So why we can use drones in Nigeria? I think they'll find that address behind the Shell petrol station.
So continuing on the Gavi topic, what other innovations do you think could be harnessed to help delivering vaccines and other essential drugs to kids? I heard that recently the CEO of Gavi was around and talking to folks in Silicon Valley about potential partnerships. What type of partnerships in particular are being thought through, and what are the challenges with them?
I think some of the biggest challenges we have, is logistics and cold chain. And that's why I talk so long about that, because, vaccines are all about getting them in the right condition to deliver. And so we are finding many challenges in access and equity that are linked to actually getting the vaccines to the places where they are needed in the condition in which they are needed. So partnerships that can help us with the cold chain, with technology that can be adapted, those are the kinds of partnerships that we're looking at. I think Gavi is also interested in partnerships in data analytics. We also do strengthening of health systems. And, many of this in many of our countries, health systems are weak. The data is there sometimes, but not used. And there's no capacity to understand what big data could do. Sometimes the data is not there and there are gaps. So partnerships that can help us work with governments to deliver some of this will also be very welcome.
Okay. Another question I had was related to this issue of cell phones that are so useful for so many things. It seems like, as you said, they really changed the ability of many people to have access to financial services. You can now save on your phone, you can receive payments on your phone, you can send money on your phone. The latest innovation in this domain is digital credit, so whereby people can just send an SMS and within a few minutes get a loan. Beforehand, the lender would have looked at their cell phone records and their mobile money payments to get a sense of creditworthiness and what the credit line should be. And then people can just get money just like that in a few minutes. And it seems to me that potentially it could really transform people's lives because it can help people cope with risks that's pervasive in their life. But at the same time, we know from the experience in the US with credit card debt and with payday loans that it can sometimes hurt people to have too easy access to credit. You can get into a spiral of debt. And especially in markets that are loosely regulated or unregulated completely, it seems like predatory behavior by lenders may be very easy to get to see. So what's your view on this proliferation of digital credit products? What do you think should be put in place in order to make sure that we get the best out of this new technology rather than the worst?
Well, I think there are two things. I mean, first of all, anything that makes life and access easier for people, particularly in rural areas, I'm very much in favor because for so long they are denied access to so many basic services and government is not able or capable of delivering. So in principle, I'm in favor of making access easier, but there are challenges. I think the first is regulatory. You know, you can't just allow these things to proliferate without some kind of regulation and some monitoring and eye on it for the problems that you talked about. And there is where you get into problem. Who should be the regulator be? Should it be the central bank or, you know, the financial regulatory authorities? Or should it be the telecoms regulator? So this is the first thing, and this is a struggle in many countries, you know, and it has not been resolved. And the reason why mobile payment systems and platforms don't work in many countries because there's a tussle going on. So that's my first question. And I think somehow you've got to get some regulation that involves the financial authorities. Of course, I would say that being a finance minister. I don't think you can leave it to the telecoms to regulate. So that's the first thing we need to focus on. If not, it will be out of control. The second thing I want to say is that people focus so much on credit and not on savings. Could we have a system that would also mobilize the savings? The fact that you live in a rural area doesn't mean you don't save. I did my master's thesis on this, and I found significant amounts of savings in rural areas. And what do people do when they don't have a means of actually saving? They put it in livestock. They'll buy a goat or a chicken, or they'll do something else, and we have all these rotating associations. So I would love to see a savings product, that could also be used to back up this credit. And I think if you link the two together, it would make a whole lot of sense.
So before we open up for questions, just a last question. You mentioned the unreliability of energy in Nigeria. It seems to be quite common in a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I was wondering whether you think this is one of the main reasons why we don't see a lot of manufacturing happening in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the cause of great rates of unemployment for the youth and not enough jobs being created. So what are the barriers to trade in FDI? To what extent is energy an issue, or are there some other underlying problems like political stability that you think are still deterring investors?
Well, I think this is a huge barrier. By some estimate of some work I'm doing in a group I'm involved in called the New Climate Economy, which looks at sustainable infrastructure. I estimate is that 2/3 of the infrastructure, let's say on the African continent, is yet to be built. And we were doing it the other way, saying, well, since it's yet to be built, this is the continent that can really set the way in building low-carbon, sustainable infrastructure. But I'm citing it to show you that there's a huge infrastructure deficit. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you don't have power, roads, ports, and all the infrastructure you need, for manufacturing, it becomes a daunting challenge. So I really believe that this is one of the most, without power. Look at textiles, look at other things. You cannot have a serious industrial policy or manufacturing without infrastructure. But we can, there are ways to overcome it. The Chinese have been helping. They did it by developing these special industrial zones. And that's what they've done now in Ethiopia. So you have it, and you can put the factories in there, and some African countries are experimenting with this. And it may have to be the way we go so that we make sure that those zones have the power they need. But of course, the power and infrastructure, they're not the only problems we have in terms of manufacturing. I think the perception of risk on the African continent is much higher. The perception is higher than the reality. And you can find that in some countries, the rate of return on investment can reach as high as 30%. But people don't see this. They see the high barriers, they see the conflicts. There's a neighborhood effect. When there's conflict in one country, then everybody, to them, Africa is one country. When people learn that Nigeria's population is actually 190 million people, and that is one of the most complex countries and economies to manage, they're surprised because they often think of African countries as very small. So there's that whole thing, but there are instruments to manage this. And this is what we are now saying. We shouldn't have any excuses in this day and age. the World Bank, the multilateral development banks, ought to develop instruments that de-risk these investments so that investors can come in and, there can be a first loss that these institutions, there are all sorts of instruments we can have now, so we shouldn't hide behind that.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Maybe we can open up for questions from the audience.
This is great. Can I ask you a question?
So thank you very much for a great set of remarks. Your example of the failure had to do with education and the laptops. And it raises the question of whether there's some barrier out there to using this amazing technology in the education field that you referred to. So is there any other thing you might add to say that ed tech could actually be contributing more than it is, and what do you think the barriers are there?
Well, I think that when we think of ed tech, my feeling is we have to do what I said, think big and think small. Some of the problems that we have are things that can be solved by very low technology approaches. And others need more sophisticated, learning techniques. For instance, teacher training. This is a big issue. How do we keep our teachers trained, motivated, and up to scratch? We've just had, in my country, in some states, exams where the teachers could not pass some of the exams that were, of the next grade of the children they were teaching. How do you solve that? It will be very labor intensive. So is there a technology approach to this where we could get these teachers learning? That would be much more cost effective for government. So those are the kinds of, if we could find an approach to this, this would be very helpful, not only in Nigeria, but in so many. So teacher training is a constant, and monitoring and grading and, keeping teachers on track is a big problem. Then at the university level, I think there's great potential for EdTech. I think that's really the place where I think we can apply all these technologies. So the massive open online courses that, professors in developing countries can tap into, so many other techniques. So if you want to ask me my opinion, I think at that level, there are tremendous opportunities and possibilities for partnerships. It is when we go a little bit lower down. Now, the other area is skills. So, not only about education, but in our country, we also need to build skills to teach people how to do things like being a good plumber, a good carpenter. In my country, these professions are not very well rewarded. Everybody wants a white-collar education and training and a white-collar job. But then the middle of the country is falling apart. So is there some application where we could also get people learning and make it look very wonderful and sophisticated, like in Singapore? When I was in Singapore, they took me to their skills and training and technology center, and it was they gave them the most amazing, beautiful building, better than the university. So when you walk in there, you really feel important. You feel important. So if we can couple these kinds of perception things with EdTech, it would be wonderful.
Thank you. You spoke at length about the importance of mobile phone technology emerging in developing countries, and I'm curious, I read a recent report that Chinese companies in some sub-Saharan African countries control about 80–90% of market share in mobile phone hardware. Similarly, Chinese companies and the government are increasingly involved in telecoms and energy infrastructure development in sub-Saharan Africa. Given what we've seen back in China of the Chinese government's attitudes towards censorship on in telecommunications, do you think that governments in developing contexts are concerned enough about the potential for Chinese companies and the government to interfere in their telecommunications, and how could leaders in these countries be better managing their relations with the Chinese?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I think there's no one general answer. There are some countries on the continent in Africa that, are not so open about the use of mobile phones or Wi-Fi or internet. And Ethiopia is one. I don't think I'm talking out of turn. Everybody knows that when you get to Addis, getting Wi-Fi is not easy. And, I remember when Prime Minister Meles was alive, and I had a one-on-one meeting with him for 1.5 hours once. I was a managing director at the World Bank then. He was a very clever man. And I tried to push him that you're getting to the point where if you don't open up on some of these things, your development is going to be impacted, because even the financial services and all that will need access. So there are some countries, that's their policy, that's the way they want to do things. But there are many other countries that are really more open. I mean, the vast majority of countries. And I don't think that the Chinese have that kind of influence. They're delivering their marketing. Huawei and all the other phone companies are just there to sell products. And they're selling products that are more appealing, cheaper, more affordable to the population. So they are out competing, the European and American companies. Not everybody can afford an iPhone of the type that you have here. So that's what they're doing. So we're not really afraid that they're interfering in that. I think they're really selling a product.
Thank you very much for coming here today. I wanted to ask you a bit about the cultural aspects of vaccination. So as you know, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nigeria, and it's claimed India, polio still is an issue largely because some people fear that there's a culturally there's sort of a fear that it might lead to sterilization or some other issues. And we have the same kind of issues with anti-vaccination movements here in California as well. And I was wondering, are there ways, is technology sort of a problem in this respect in sort of spreading these kinds of memes, how do you think about overcoming that? And
yeah, I think there are some, I'm such a lover of technology, especially the enabling kind. I really feel that we cannot move development unless we change and adopt all these technologies. But sometimes it can't solve all your problems. I mean, there are cultural problems, and sometimes they are turned into religious problems, but I don't think they're really religious. So we have a barrier, mostly in the north of my country. It's very difficult, to deliver these vaccines. There are all sorts of myths, unfortunately. Some people believe that, the HPV, for example, which is a new vaccine that can really prevent 266,000 deaths a year of women, if you can vaccinate these girls. But people believe that you're coming to sterilize them. If they take the vaccine, they won't be able to have children in future. You have something, you're trying to, stop their boys and so on. So there are cultural barriers, and the way we try to overcome it at home is actually having leaders like the imams or the president or ministers bringing their children and vaccinating them so people can see that this is for everybody. We are not trying to do you harm, to overcome some of these fears. There was some time that they said, these vaccines are being brought to do harm to Islamic or Muslim people. So we went and got our vaccines from Indonesia. And we made sure that people knew that these vaccines are coming to you from another Muslim-dominated country. And then, they were accepted. So you have to overcome all those barriers. I'm not sure it's technology this time. It can't solve everything. So we actually have to do a very strong piece of work to talk to people and show them. Now, it's amazing. In London, I gave a speech like this at a venue, and a woman got up and said to me, and she was so angry, and she said, you said you're the chair of vaccines and immunization, but in my school, and this was in London, she said, but there are some parents who refuse to have their children vaccinated. What are you doing about it? And I had to tell her that we are not working in the UK. And then she said, why am I here? But it's becoming a problem in developed countries. And this is what happens when you take things for granted. When you have the luxury of things going right. And then people suddenly begin to have these fears. Now, I'm not knocking it. Everybody's entitled to their own individual feelings about their children. But you have to remember that there's very strong externalities attached to not having your child vaccinated, because it can sweep a school. So yes, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here in the US, the UK, and other places.
We have time for two more questions quickly.
Yes, thank you so much for your very inspiring speech. I would like to ask you if you could draw some conclusions on two aspects. First of all, what does it mean for research on development? And my second question, is there any implication of what you are saying for foreign aid, for development cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, for first of all, for the implications for research, I think they're tremendous, and that's why I'm excited about this center, because I think there's still so much to be done. My feeling is that we're coming up against the tough issues now. Sort of the last mile problem, those areas that are not going to be so easy to have answers, because we have a constellation of factors, conflicts, governance issues, health issues, we have pandemics that come up, we'll not know how to solve. We have antimicrobial resistance that is coming. So we do need multidisciplinary research. It's not the siloed kind. It's not one approach that is going to solve issues anymore the way we used to. So that is the first point. And on development cooperation, what does this mean? I think for me, it cannot be development cooperation as usual. Business as usual is over. Why is that? Because we need scale. And we have shown that we have not been as able to scale with the approaches we've used with aid. So the issue is, if we're going to attain the SDGs, we'll need to about 2 trillion or whatever the estimate is, additional resources a year in order to deliver. How are we going to get that scale? Let's say, on the African continent, you're getting $50 billion a year in aid. What's that going to do? So you've got to think differently. And that is, how can the multilateral development banks take the 150 or so billion that they're disbursing and scale, double or triple that in order to reach scale? So I think aid has to change. It's all about leverage now. How can we leverage what we have?
Okay, one last question, and then we will have to end. I'm on strict order.
Hi, thank you for your great insights and thoughts. You brought up a couple of things that really stood out to me when you said that the NERICA and mobile phone collaboration led to an annual saving of about 162 million. And I'm Nigerian, and corruption is a big issue. So my first thing that came to my mind is what happened to that money, or what's being done in terms of technology and corruption and keeping government accountable. And I was wondering whether you could speak to that, because that consistently comes up as a big issue for going back home, or businesses, or us living there.
Well, there's so many examples about that, what technology can do. Well, that's one of them, So the $162 million a year, instead of being siphoned away, is reinvested into the budget, to help us finance other things like healthcare, like more in the agricultural sector, reinvested into that sector. So that's one. Two, another popular example, which I've given many times, is my own experience in trying to solve the financial problems of our country. And when I came the first time in 2003 as finance minister, I found that all our systems were cash-based. In a country as large as Nigeria, what did that mean? I found, as finance minister, that if I want to pay the Ministry of Agriculture, I would have, first of all, I didn't know how many civil servants were working there. You know, we would ask, and each month they will give a different answer. So we'll have to transfer cash to the Ministry of Agriculture's accounts, and then they would pay their workers. That's how the phenomenon of ghost workers came to be in our system. And that was when I went to President Obasanjo at the time and said, this cannot be. We have to do something. And so we got the World Bank, the UK DFID, the USAID joined us in a $93 million project, concessional loan, and we started building some things that sound very unsexy. The government integrated financial management platform, the integrated personnel and payroll information system, IPIS, and the TSA, the Treasury Single Account. Very unsexy. But what did this mean? This was put all our systems on an electronic platform that connected the budget with the Treasury. And then the IPIS enabled us to put people biometrically. Each civil servant now had to have biometrics, so we could pay them directly. And with that, we were able to cut a long story short. But by the way, we started this. I resigned and left in 2006. And then I found that the project slowed down. Why? Because who was behind all those ghost workers? By the time we finished the project, we had weeded out 65,000 ghost workers and saved the government $1.1 billion. But people were behind those ghost workers. And do you think they liked Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala? The answer is no. When I came back the second time, they had stopped building this. We rejuvenated the World Bank project, had them restructure it. All this is down, you know, on paper. And then we tried to, by the time I left this second time, we had implemented the thing 75%. And that's 10 years. It takes time to build systems. It takes time. And behind those ghost workers are people. We even had ghost pensioners, because the ghost workers retired to become pensioners. And you think the people collecting those ghost pensions and those ghost salaries will like the person trying to stop it? No, of course not. But that's an example for you, $1.1 billion. I have a book coming out talking about this, so you should buy it first.
Okay. Well, there may be people in Nigeria who are not very fond of you, but we surely are here. Thank you so much for being here with us.